Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are taking on a genuinely vital topic, one that affects millions of people worldwide, yet, it's just so often fundamentally misunderstood. Today we're demystifying dyslexia. We're going to move far beyond those common misconceptions to really get to the bottom of what this condition is, how it secretly impacts learners, and most importantly, how we can practically empower the people affected by it. So whether you're a teacher, a parent, or really just someone who loves to learn, let's explore this together and figure out how we can make a real difference.
Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap. We're going to cover understanding dyslexia, spotting the hidden signs, the hidden emotional toll, strategies for the classroom, accommodating pupil performance, and finally, screening and early intervention. All right, starting things off with Section 1, Understanding Dyslexia.
To truly support learners, we first have to understand the exact neurological reality here. So, to get grounded, let's look at the International Dyslexia Association's formal definition. Basically, they state that dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is entirely neurological in origin. It involves a deficit in the phonological component of language. But what does that actually mean in plain English? Well, it means it affects how the brain processes language components. Specifically, it causes major difficulties with word recognition, decoding, and spelling. And the absolutely critical takeaway here is that these difficulties are often completely unexpected when you compare them to a person's other cognitive abilities. It is not, let me repeat that, it is not a reflection of overall intelligence.
And this brilliantly illustrates some things we really need to clear up right now. Let's wipe the slate clean of some persistent myths. Dyslexia is not a disease. It is not something that can be, quote-unquote, cured, and there is absolutely no way it's linked to a low IQ. Actually, it's often the exact opposite. The facts tell us it's a structural, neurological difference. Yes, it requires specialized, ongoing support, but dyslexic individuals often excel brilliantly in areas way outside conventional norms. Things like sports, computer science, art, or complex math.
Moving right along to Section 2, Spotting the Hidden Signs.
Catching the signs early is the crucial first step to helping an affected child. Now, when you hear dyslexia, you probably immediately think of slow reading speed and really severe spelling difficulties, right? And sure, those are massive academic red flags. But the signs actually bleed into other areas you might not expect. For instance, a child might really struggle to memorize basic sequences, like the days of the week, or even the alphabet. They might have a surprisingly hard time learning a foreign language, which, let's be honest, is tough enough for the rest of us, or even making sense of standard math problems.
But the scope of this condition is surprisingly vast. It extends way past academic textbooks. We're talking non-academic signs too, like issues with physical coordination or just having a really poor sense of direction. A child might have an incredibly skewed sense of time, making deadlines practically impossible for them. You might see them constantly struggling to just organize their backpack or their bedroom. And look, while a messy room is pretty much a staple of childhood, in this context, it's part of a much broader neurological pattern. Now, it's super important to remember that no single one of these symptoms confirms a diagnosis on its own, but together, they paint a picture of a kid who is just struggling to process the world in the conventional way.
Which brings us to Section 3, the hidden emotional toll.
Think about this heartbreaking fact for a second. When dyslexic learners succeed, they most commonly credit their success to pure luck. Unlike an average student who gets a good grade and thinks, hey, I worked hard for this, dyslexic children often feel so entirely powerless that they believe their wins are just flukes, pure chance. It's really devastating. Studies actually show that these children frequently develop a deep, profound sense of inferiority and failure before they even hit 10 years old.
And as you might guess, this leads to immense anxiety and depression. But here is a crucial insight that I found incredibly surprising. Childhood depression rarely looks like adult depression. While a depressed adult might just appear lethargic, sad, or totally apathetic, a depressed dyslexic child will very often misbehave. They'll push the absolute limits of what they can get away with. Why? Because acting out is a shield. It's a remarkably effective way to mask their true feelings of failure and worthlessness from their friends and their teachers.
To put all this into perspective, up to 30% of dyslexic children are also diagnosed with ADHD. 30%! Now, neither condition causes the other, but you can imagine how this overlap just massively amplifies the challenges they're facing in a standard, noisy classroom environment. It is a really heavy burden for a young mind to carry every single day.
All right, let's switch gears and talk solutions. Section 4, Strategies for the Classroom.
If we really want dyslexic children to succeed, allowances and accommodations cannot be treated as special one-off favors. They literally have to become a standard part of the classroom's DNA. Teachers need to prioritize progress over final grades. It's all about recognizing and actually rewarding the sheer effort a dyslexic student puts in, rather than overly focusing on a perfectly polished end result. So how do we practically modify the classroom materials? Well, it's a chunking process. Step 1, simplify your written instructions. Step 2, present the work in small, digestible stages. For example, instead of handing a child a massive, totally intimidating 50-page workbook and telling them to flip to page 10, just hand them a single photocopy of page 10. Boom. You instantly remove that terrible feeling of being overwhelmed. And step 3, remove unnecessary visual distractions from those pages so their brain can focus entirely on the core task at hand.
So the crucial point here is that we have to fundamentally change how we instruct. When you're speaking to a class, don't just assume everyone is perfectly processing that auditory information. Write your key points on the board. Use visual aids. Give dyslexic learners a copy of the lesson notes up front so they aren't frantically scrambling to keep up. And most importantly, verify their understanding. But, do it discreetly, one-on-one, rather than calling them out in front of the whole room.
Next up is Section 5, Accommodating Pupil Performance.
So, traditional teaching methods often rely way too heavily on detailed written tests or expecting a kid to start an assignment from scratch on a blank page. But with a few simple pivots, you can instantly unlock a student's potential. Try swapping a heavy written test for a multiple-choice format or an oral exam. Instead of handing out a blank page, provide a sample of what the final project should actually look like so they have a clear visual roadmap. And honestly, never underestimate the power of the buddy system. Peer-mediated learning so often gives dyslexic learners that boost of confidence they might lack when they're working completely alone.
And that leads us to our final chapter, Section 6, Screening and Early Intervention. Now, what's really interesting here is how incredibly simple a starting point can be. Just a basic 6-question early-stage screener, asking simple things about difficulty with spelling, learning letter names, or reading speed. Now, obviously, this doesn't give you a formal diagnosis, but what it does do is provide a vital baseline reading of a child's struggles. It's essentially the canary in the coal mine.
Once a screener like that is completed, you get a score that places the child in a specific risk tier. Basically, a score under 16 is low risk. But if a child scores in the 16 to 21 range, they're sitting at moderate risk, and anything above 21 is high risk. It is absolutely crucial that any child falling into the moderate or high-risk bracket undergoes a formal, full evaluation by a licensed practitioner, because that is exactly how they get access to the specialized 30 to 45-minute daily interventions that can literally change the entire trajectory of their education. So, that brings us to a final, really important question to leave you with today. How will you use this knowledge to empower the next dyslexic learner you meet? As we've seen, dyslexia isn't a lack of intelligence. It's just a unique neurological blueprint. If you are ever in doubt about a child's struggles, remember that it is always, always better to be proactive, to be safe rather than sorry when it comes to their educational future. Notice the signs, lead with empathy, and make those accommodations. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.